The Most Important People in the World, with Charles Berman and Jonathan Berman. Featuring interviews with people with interesting viewpoints, which, if true, could make them the most important people in the world. Let's meet one of them now. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Most Important People in the World podcast. I am Charles Berman.
Jonathan Berman.
And we have with us on the line with us today Carlton Brown, the author of the book Sun God's Sacred Secrets, which already is a pretty intriguing title. Thank you very much for coming on the program with us.
Thank you very much, Charles and John. I really appreciate the opportunity.
So maybe you can start off, because I know a lot of people won't be familiar with Sun God's Sacred Secrets. Maybe you can start off explaining for us a little bit what are the sacred secrets, who are the sun gods, maybe a little bit of explanation around it.
Yeah, sure. I think the title, the full title of the book, Sun God's Sacred Secrets, the archaeology, art, and science of altered states of consciousness, a descriptive title, and effectively what I found doing or engaging in an archaeology project, pyramid archaeology project, looking at 4 different religions, I found all of the sacred ritual processes underpinning these religions that were developed by those ancient priesthoods. So. Effectively, it's a meditation-based process. Using hallucinogens and sacredly timing that to help them switch their states of consciousness. And so, if we look to ancient Egypt, the pharaohs, we look over some 3,000 years. They embedded in their temple art and pyramid art and icons ritual processes. So the pharaohs. You look at the art. You look at leaders. You look and the deity in the same graphic, and they've got hallucinogens stuck between them, and you then move to Central and South America, and again whilst the fingerprint is not identical, it's thematically identical. So you always see the sun god or sun goddess in conjunction with hallucinogens and in conjunction with sacred time symbolism. So that was the thing that I found, and ultimately that's what the book's about.
Now, in psychedelic art, and I think in some of the 1960s studies of psychedelia, there's an effect of psychotropics, which is people tend to see geometric figures like triangles or icosahedrons. Do you think that might have inspired the pyramid shapes?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's it's an interesting question. I think, first off, there are different levels and layers to, altered states of consciousness, which is what hallucinogens are doing. It's not a magical effect of the chemical, but it's actually accessing our 4th state of consciousness. And there are differing levels or stages within altered states of consciousness where, what you're talking about is the anoptic shapes and things like that. So, and they are, how do we call it, indelibly imprinted on the collective human consciousness. I think, pyramids is it's an interesting thing. Why do you see them in China, Northern Africa, and in particular Egypt, and then you come to Central and South America and in other parts of the world? And, the long and the short is, I believe these were cultures that were connected. And, while it's not contained in this book, I've certainly released something on the internet that shows significant interrelationships between Giza, Xi'an in China, and Teotihuacan in Mexico. So, shared knowledge through, a direct communication or communication through altered states of consciousness, or getting that knowledge and insight from, universal consciousness itself.
That's fascinating, because you would think those are very distant places. You'd think it'd be difficult to travel in the ancient times. I'm wondering how you made this discovery and how it worked. Perhaps was it through maybe out of body states of consciousness that they communicated?
Are you talking about how I made it, or how they would have made it?
Well, how did you make it, and maybe if that gave you some insight into how they did it?
Yeah, look, I've had how do we call it, a burning interest in this field, all of my life, and I would say sort of an unusual creature, not the norm, and I've always had an interest in Giza, the ancient world, religion, spirituality, mythology, UFOs, and conspiracy theory, and the project for me got well underway in 2008. I went on a diving holiday to Egypt, and I took a book with me called Path of the Poles, and it was by Charles Hapgood, and that book probably inspired Graham Hancock's to write Fingerprints of the Gods. And in reading that, he talked of a global catastrophe involving the Earth's crust shifting. And so I had an obvious question from that: were the pyramids built before or after this event? And so the idea or the thinking was, if I looked at them and they were built afterwards, I'd expect to see some sort of common alignment. If they were built beforehand, then maybe the alignments might be chaotic. And so I answered that question pretty quickly, because these pyramids and temples delineate the equinox and solstice sunsets and sunrises. And I created a pyramid map, a global map. I basically put hundreds of pyramids on this map, and it was just in looking at that things started to jump out at me. And all the while this is going on, I'm looking at their sacred festival dates and realizing these correspond with the solstices and the equinoxes. And I start diving into solar terrestrial physics, and I realize the solstices and the equinoxes represent some very interesting times of the year when our overhead electromagnetic and magnetic environments peak. And so, the long and the short is these alignments were about telling time. They embedded the ritual processes in the art and iconography as a medium for, transmitting that to other people, with teaching. There was a science there. Priesthoods were involved in driving the ritual process, and they worked very closely with leaders to access altered states of consciousness, and they developed processes for that. And ultimately, that comes down to biology, which is my interesting, or my area of interest. And so, what I was doing was, looking at the science involved, what does science tell us in terms of things that can alter brain function? And so, I decided to filter the archaeology looking for evidence of electromagnetic, magnetic, acoustic, wave fields, neurochemicals, and processes like meditation. And ultimately, that's how I found the fingerprint.
Well, that's fascinating, and I wonder if one of the secrets contained in the book then is how we can now use the discoveries of science to recreate what the priesthoods would have been teaching, and perhaps even make contact with these ancient gods.
Yeah, look, I think, the essence of my book is, it's a book that uniquely discovers this archaeological fingerprint shared by 4 different sun god religions spanning 3 different continents and more than 5,000 years of human, history. And, the priesthoods effectively left a fingerprint, which was the evidence, that they were conducting these ritual processes. What I did was effectively reverse engineer that. So, if you piece all of the archaeology together, and you look at ancient religions and their evolution. We started out in caves, we built tunnels underground, we built chambers and pyramids, and then we moved to building temples with inner temple sanctums. And what these places represent, they're all thick walled, they're all incredibly isolating in terms of the sensory environment. And if you look at the art and icons, you see evidence of meditation. And then when you look into the art and icons, you're seeing, in Egypt it was the blue water lily, and for the Maya it was the white water lily. In India it was the pink lotus. You go to South America, it was hallucinogenic cactus. And so they left this evidence of hallucinogens, sensory silence, meditation, and the symbolism relating to sacred time. So all I've done is to bring all of those elements together, the common themes, which is eyes closed meditation in sensory silence, conducted at sacred time, which is the solstices and the equinoxes, and utilizing hallucinogens. And I've pulled that together into a process in terms of how we go about preparing for this, the fasting, the conducting ceremonies, invocation, to make it an incredibly sacred process. And, it's then just a matter of sitting down and pulling all of these things together. And, what I would say in my hands is probably, 3 out of 4 times I access transcendental states of consciousness using this process. Whereas in my earlier life in using hallucinogens, I never did. It was always eyes open. And whilst they were incredibly, profound experiences and, very much connecting and, being really brutally honest with yourself, they were never transcendental until I developed this process.
Now, would you say that these processes, since they appear to have arrived in many different places in the world, are fundamental to human nature, and it's inevitable that a civilization will figure it out and then perhaps forget it again?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a very, very big question. And I think, if I were looking into the ancient world and looked at the 2 most common methods, first off, we have this meditation-based ritual. You see it in the Indus Valley. You see evidence of it. Look at the pharaohs all seated down with their hands on their knees. You come to Central and South America as well. So meditation, I think, humanity figured that out a long time ago as a gateway. I think shamanism, even before that, with acoustic methods, so, rapid drumming over, 200, 230 beats per minute. So those were the two main methods, that they developed in, the ancient world. Now, I think, one of the things we have to appreciate is religious assimilation. And, religion always followed as the, I call it the dark shadow following leadership. And, leaders, they were in the business of, creating ever bigger territories with, greater access to resources. And they ultimately built state-based societies and empires. And religion followed, very closely behind. So I think there's religion for me it's a bit like corporate merger and acquisition. These things grow through M&A. And they share knowledge and know-how, and ultimately the religions got more and more sophisticated. But I also believe, there is evidence, and you certainly look to the field of transpersonal psychology and the work that Stanislav Grof has done, here where he talks about knowledge and information being imparted. And, I know myself through direct experience that is the case. You're accessing universal consciousness and everything is known. And, this is available to us.
That's very exciting, and I know a lot of, it's impossible to underestimate how important the sun is for humanity. And yes. I know a lot of people out there are going to hear the power of this and be interested. How can they, how they can contact a sun god, how they can access universal consciousness. Now, maybe we can explain for them, in case it's a little unclear for some listeners, what exactly is an altered state of consciousness and how they could move towards using that to access some of the things we've been talking about.
Well, in my day-to-day life, I think I go through several states of consciousness: sleep, wakefulness, hunger, falling.
Right, so this would be something out of the ordinary from that, I imagine.
Yeah.
No, I think you've hit on a, it's an incredibly interesting question, and number 2, you've hit on an incredibly important point that, and I don't think it's commonly understood, is, I certainly before I started this project, I was definitely aware that we existed in 3 states of consciousness at least, and that was being awake, asleep, and then dreaming. And, ultimately altered states of consciousness, we've all been biologically programmed for this, the brain architecture and the highways that open up and close, they've been imprinted in everybody's, inherited physiology. And, I think a lot of people get confused because of the story of religion and spirituality. It doesn't really, put it in biological terms. It tries to sort of abstract it somewhere else, and we get lost in that and, all of the corruptions that go along with it. But I think, ultimately for me, and, this is around states of consciousness that are different from the awakened state, with varying degrees of transcending our identity, space and time. And what I mean by identity, I'm talking about our ego, mind, our body, and our sensory perceptions. And, this is ultimately where the funny stuff happens, or the ineffable happens. And, I mentioned before about Stanislav Grof, he's the grandfather of the transpersonal psychology field. From my point of view, he's pure science, and he tells us very objectively, he's a cartographer. He's mapped out over 50 years of his career working with, psychologically, people with, psychological maladies, helping them heal deeply and profoundly heal. And, he defines as consciousness within and beyond objective reality. And what he means by within objective reality, he talks about time expansion. So the possibility of, being aware of ourselves as a fetus, in the uterus or in the birth process, or being aware of our mother's, feelings and sensations when she's taking noxious substances, that sort of thing. We can have, prior incarnations, so who we've been in previous lives, our ancestry, evolutionary memory and time travel. And, when we're looking beyond objective reality, these for me are, the awareness encounters. And I think the most significant and profound is, unity states of consciousness. This is, this is the saying where, God is I and I am God. You become aware through the all-seeing eye that you are the entire universe and the entire universe is you.
And that's fantastic. Now, it seems, to me, now, is this something in your view that everyone, that would appeal to everyone, or is there a certain smaller set of audience that might be interested in this process in this book, or should everyone try these altered states of consciousness?
Look, I have personal views, and then I have the mind of a veterinarian and someone focused on, diseases and maladies and, in the population. And I think, my own interest is around, spiritual transformation, directly accessing our spirituality. And, I think the process of living life coming through parenthood, it corrupts our minds and, therefore, it leads to many dysfunctions, and you've only got to look at the world we live in today to realize that. So, spiritual transformation is about having these profound experiences, establishing that anchor or that bedrock from which, we can reshape our lives, and we can use this, A, for spiritual transformation, and B, profound spiritual healing. So healing, early childhood wounds, that as a consequence of coming through parenthood. I think, as well, there are those people who are already tweaking consciousness. So, we're on the, how do we call it, those spiritual meditation practitioners, the new age, spiritual people who are, already using meditation, but, for mindfulness as opposed to exploring transcendental states of consciousness. And you then have people who are utilizing psychedelics. A lot of people are doing that in a very sacred and very profound way, but you look on shroomery and Erowid and you realize there's a lot of people combining it with other drugs and alcohol and, really messed up, processes. So they're not having these, the sort of experiences they could. So I think, for me, when we look at, who are the medical segments in the market, I think, there's an aging population, and a significant number of people dealing with death anxiety and existential crises, people with cancer having to come to grips with the fact they're going to be dead in a few months' time. You've got people with post-traumatic stress syndrome, addictions, and people with profound psychological damage as a result of childhood injury. So, and what we're seeing certainly, there was a lot of research done in the 60s and early 70s looking at the utility of, psychedelics and, in offering significant benefits to these people. And that research was switched off as a function of the psychedelic experiment in the 60s. And, we lost a lot of very, very valuable tools. So I think, the ritual processes I'm describing through ritual meditation in this book are eminently applicable to, a whole host of, situations that could benefit the human population.
Now, laws differ by region, but in a lot of places, some psychedelics are going to be difficult to access legally. How would you recommend those people go about the chemical aspects of transcendental meditation? Contact,
yeah.
I mean, look, it's an incredibly interesting question, and I first of all, I've got to put caveats and cautions in here, as you see in the book. Is I'm not advocating that people should do this. I'm trying to educate people so that if they take the decision to do this, that they have the know-how, the knowledge, and the tools and the processes to do it safely. And but effectively, we purchase these things online. You can't do that with LSD, so you have to find people who can supply that, and you have to be very careful around ensuring what you get. But you can purchase grow kits for magic mushrooms online. I think whilst there are a wide array of potential hallucinogens one can use, my favourites are magic mushrooms, LSD, and cactus if I can get my hands on it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the others, like dimethyltryptamine, ayahuasca, those are I would say not for the inexperienced voyager. I think you need a lot of respect to use those. But certainly you buy the stuff online.
I'm curious about one thing, and I don't want to put you on the spot because you haven't mentioned it, but it's just touched something that I had in my memory, is that I know Amanita muscaria has been used by shamans in Siberia and some other places. Do you think that's a related phenomenon? Is that accessing the same universal consciousness?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we come back to the biology, and rather than thinking it's something in the plant, the fungus, or whatever, just see them as packages. We're used to consuming pharmaceutical pills, so just see the natural product of nature as the pill containing the active ingredient, and the active ingredient has particular modes of action that are of utility in the brain. And I think what you've got to realise is there's some biological circuitry in your brain. And that when you do things like meditation, you're activating that process, and using hallucinogens, you're supplementing that process. So I think, these were just, how do we call it? These were just keys that opened doors to circuitry already in the human brain, and these ancient shamanic societies understood this.
One thing that's great. One thing I'm very curious about is that, you've mentioned these ancient societies, not just the shamanic societies, but ancient Egypt and China and Central American societies. Do you think that you personally, using these methods, have actually contacted their deities, or maybe the beings that they were referring to, like Aten, when they wrote about their deities?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a very, very good question, and I think as Terence McKenna said, the third guest at the party is culture, and so these religions are developed; they're culturally specific, culturally and temporally specific. So, do I or have I accessed, seen, deities from a particular religion? Well, I would say at the spring equinox last year. I don't know which deity it was, but I certainly experienced a deity in the context of Giza. And there was I was literally wrapped by a massive serpent, and that serpent head sitting right above me, and it turned from the serpent head into a human form head. So I've definitely had that deity type experience, but I think it's culturally specific, and you would have to go into those societies, find people who are still practicing according to those cultures, and maybe you can plug it into that for sure.
I'm finding this very interesting, and I'm. One thing that's sort of striking is, I think, how in a lot of mainstream articles that you get, or a lot of mainstream summary histories, you don't find emphasis on the hallucinogenic or the altered consciousness aspects of some of these civilizations. Yeah. Why do you find that is? Do you think there's sort of trying to sanitize that?
Yeah, look, we've, I would say humanity today is the victim of, 2 millennia of monotheistic religions and, spiritual faiths that lost huge amounts of their own information. So, I think, it's not, we've only got to look at what the ancient Church of Rome did in terms of wiping out the pagan religions of Europe, and, then what it did in Central and South America, and the human carnage involved. This is about controlling people. And, that partnership with leaders was about controlling society so they could effectively be harnessed and pay taxes and, allow the pony show to go on. And, so, this knowledge was, number one, as it was always kept secret. It was always hidden within priesthoods because it was their source of power. And ultimately, over time, did that, was its integrity maintained? I don't know. But what I do know is that, people of 21st century are not being taught by any of the religion or spiritual faiths how to directly access altered states of consciousness. So, it's either got lost or it's a function of, religion and their need to control and assimilate taxes.
Now, if I can play the devil's advocate for a moment, an engineer might say, well, look, pyramids were built in the ancient world because it's a natural truss structure. It's very strong, and that's, a sensible way for culture without earth-moving equipment to construct large structures. And, people on hallucinogens will hallucinate, and there's a part of the human mind that can create these feelings of transcendence, and people tap into that, and that's the biology of the human brain, and everything is materialistic, and none of this is anything more than what you would expect given the biology and engineering. How would you respond to someone like that?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's, there's always going to be devil's advocates, and, I think the thing is, these things happened. They built pyramids. And some of those, if you look to Egypt and you look at Giza and, the Giza Plateau and the Red Pyramids, they're amongst the oldest and the best preserved. And, anything and everything they built thereafter, fell apart, and it didn't really survive the journey. Certainly, to the same standard. So, I think there was knowledge and insight, and those structures are, a function of physics. They're a function of engineering. But the point is they transitioned over time. So, they came up in specific epochs. And then they transitioned from pyramids into building temples. So, why did they, go through a phase of pyramid building or come into pyramid building, go through it and then come out the other side? And, I don't have an answer for that. What's the logic in building, the Giza pyramids, the logistics required to make that happen over such a prolonged period of time are just incomprehensible, unimaginable. In order to build such structures, you have to be able to harness your people. You have to be able to lead them. You have to be able to organize them, to train and develop them. And, the skill required to do that is beyond slavery. This was, a high level of society, technology and engineering organization. You have to ask an engineer to answer that question. And I think the answer you get is going to be different depending upon the pyramids that you're talking about. For me, there's function and structure, there's structure and function. And, these held purposes, they were, about isolating the individuals so that they could quieten the brain. They could engage the meditation process. And, that was the knowledge at the time that was available. Regarding the biology of the brain, I mean, I don't even think 21st century humanity really gets it. So there were some incredibly knowledgeable and adept people in our past who clearly did understand universal consciousness. And, this is not just merely, something you take and you switch on. It's around a whole understanding, that's evolved over many, many thousands of years, a process by which we can access this doorway in our minds to access altered states.
Now, one thing, we're coming close to our time, but I think one thing that I'm very curious about, and I think the listeners will be too, is since you've had contact with this universal consciousness, what sort of wisdom or message have you taken from it, and what sort of message can people draw from these processes and from what they'll learn from the book?
Yeah. Look, I mean, how do we call it? It's an incredibly good question. I would say my eyes are opening up every single day. And, I launched the book 12 months ago, and I'm in the process now of rewriting the book, simply because I have taken a quantum leap in terms of my understanding of the profoundness of these rituals and what they can do. But I think, for me, the centering point is that they allow you to directly access what I would call real spirituality. So it's not, the cognitive adjustment by reading books and, saying nice things and trying to act out, a more civilized way of living our life. This is around developing an anchor in your very being and awareness right at the very core that says that there is a God, there is universal consciousness. And I realize, things have happened in my life that have, obliviated my vision. They've taken me away from my true essential self, and that's namely our childhoods. And so, the big orientation for me is, I look back in my past, there was an abused childhood there, and it leaves its scars today of repetitive cycles that repeat themselves and, cause suffering. And, so the orientation is that I am loved. Loved in a way beyond human words can describe. And that love comes from universal consciousness or God. And that, awarenesses come that ultimately lead you down the path of, allowing love and compassion and acceptance and forgiveness and generosity and non-judgmentalism into your life. And that we have ultimately this profound personal healing is our gateway to accessing higher states of consciousness.
And if someone would like to buy your book, how would they go about finding it?
Sure, it's available on Amazon, iBookstore, Barnes & Noble and Kobo. You can also access my website, www.carltonbrownv47.com, and that will take you through to those various links. It'll take you through to my various social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and there are a whole series of free resources like accessing a free meditation calendar, downloading 450 pyramid site alignments and watching the sunrises and sunsets, and photo albums of the various sites that I've been to as well.
Well, that's this one could speak for hours because it's just such a fantastically interesting subject. But that is why there is a book.
Indeed, and actually, one passing thought actually.
Oh yes.
Lurking in the, if you look at motivations, I listened to a video a number of years ago by Jiddu Krishnamurti. He was an Indian spiritual philosopher, Hindu, and he asked the question there: what is it going to take to, for humanity to spiritually transform itself and awaken up en masse? And while I was doing this project, that question just, reverberated in my mind and was indelibly impressed in my mind, and it really drove, the project. And, one of the other areas of, research that I'm into as a function of doing my archaeology is global climate change. And, what I've come to realize is we are coming toward the end of this interglacial period, and after which another ice age will start. And those ice ages, they happen cyclically, periodically. They last for nearly 100,000 years. And if I look at where humanity stands right now, we are coming to the end of this interglacial. The ice age will happen. And this question, I'm sure Jiddu Krishnamurti unknowingly was asking that question, what are we, how are we as a species going to evolve, wake up, and do this en masse before the ice age starts and humanity, suffers the impact of that.
That's a fantastically important message for all of us now. And I want to thank you very much for bringing all of this knowledge to the table for us, and all this potentially this ancient wisdom that humanity has been accessing in various forms for thousands of years. We'll remind people once again it's www.carltonbrown47.com.
V47.com.
V47, that's right. CarltonBrownV47.com. And the website is Sun God Sacred Secrets for everything you've been listening to. Thank you so much for coming on the program with us.
Thank you very much for having me today. Really enjoyed it. And have a great day yourselves.
You too. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been The Most Important People in the World. We've been speaking with Carlton Brown, author of Sun God Sacred Secrets. I'm Charles Berman.
I'm still Jonathan Berman.
Thank you for listening, and tune in again next time if you want to hear the show.
Oh, and visualize sending us money.
That's right.
Yeah.
And our website, our email address is mostimportantpeopleintheworld@gmail.com if you have guest ideas, guest pitch, or suggestions or comments for the program.
And we don't have a website yet, but we will. So if you want to visit our website, go to a later episode and listen to the end of it, and we'll tell you what it is.
That's right. We might even link it on the description if you're lucky. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to The Most Important People in the World. With feedback or guest ideas, contact us at mostimportantpeopleintheworld@gmail.com.